talking to you about, is it another Cold War which had already begun? It's different from the last one. Where will it go? How will it impact our lives? It's crucial to our understanding and reshaping of the world around us. Now, the second issue, of course, is the perils to stability of the region. Now, the region is clearly still assessing which way this will turn, which way Afghanistan itself will go, and much depends on what goes on in Afghanistan, right? And for Pakistan, Afghan peace and stability is vital and instrumental to Pakistan's peace and stability and a redefinition of all our goals as we've been trying to make for the last 10 years. Why is Afghanistan so important to us? Simple reason, and not just to the region, particularly because we share that very long porous border. It has, of course, been fenced, but we have a history of looking at and understanding events as they unfold. And we have seen that what goes on in Afghanistan does not stay in Afghanistan. That's very clear. It blows back into Pakistan, particularly Karachi, which is the largest Pashtun city in the world, more than Kabul and Peshawar combined in terms of Pashtun populations. And much of the influx has come during the last anti-Soviet jihad, as we were part of it. So those are large defining events that not just infuse our memory of the situation, but shape our responses and worldviews. So what do thinking countries, polities, and policy elites do? They learn from history, they thrash out their lessons, and they say, all right, now we must pivot away from such caprice and move away. If XY policy has brought us nothing but destruction and tumult and conflict, then let's move away from it. And that's a decision that was taken, say, 10 years ago. The last democratic government came in 2001. Brought us many, again, existential challenges, and I think we made them willy-nilly. We've come into the 21st century, still vilified as the poster child of a country that exports, rightly, this is mostly wrongly now, exports terrorism and plays host to sanctuaries, which is one of our fundamental and critical problems in terms of understanding and seeing where that can take us. And how we have changed, our inability to project how we have changed, and to turn the aircraft carrier in the water 360 degrees. It takes a while, and part of the problem is that many takers in the world are unwilling to see the change. Some are. Course corrections are painful, and they often lead to 2 steps backward and 2 steps forward and 1 step backward, like all great structural change. And this is a tanker that's turning. It's been turning since 2009 or 2008 rather, when Pakistan decided that it has a limited influence. It wants to limit its influence, but also has limited influence on what goes on in Afghanistan. That is when Pakistan decided 2-3 key things. One was that Pakistan must maintain a policy of political neutrality in Afghanistan. What does that mean? It means no strategic backyard games. Afghanistan must decide its own future, and Pakistan must support that decision making, both in process and outcome, but must not become a key player in the process. It must remain a supporting part of the whole architecture of change. And in this, we must not be apologetic about saying that we have a right to stability on our western border and we have a right to security on our eastern border. Every country has a right to hedge their bets. Let's not be unrealistic, but we must be very clear that there has been a long history of also, shall we say, torment with Afghanistan. There have been many, and people in Pakistan are often very, very confused and unpleasantly surprised when they hear from channels in Afghanistan, when we see a whole part of when we see transmissions from Kabul, when we see anger from civil society, uh, project, old tropes, old policy tropes that are still catching up with their mindsets. And in that whole situation, Pakistan has become a bit of a victim of literally being the blame game poster child. So if anything goes wrong, whether it's in Kabul or whether it's with ISAF forces or NATO forces, in holding those posts for 20 years, it was often and continues to be blamed on Pakistan. So we have to be very, very careful about how things play out. Secondly, the peril to Pakistan is very, very, to my mind, uh, out in play, because clearly now we will look at Afghanistan itself and how the new Taliban consolidation plays out. But in all of this, in all of these developments, Pakistan must be watching. It has not rushed to do anything precipitous. We are rightly, obviously, assisting the evacuations and other humanitarian problems, which, of course, we all must do as good neighbors. And we certainly have been good neighbors, and we are often surprised as to why Afghanistan is often angry with us. So we must analyze that also and move forward with full embrace of the policy of Afghan neutrality. Now, having said that, I think we are doing that. I think Pakistan is announcing that repeatedly, that it wants, and it's done that through the last three governments. Repeatedly, the one message that we are seeking an inclusive government, we are neutral in Afghanistan, and we are seeking an autonomous Afghanistan that makes its own decisions. So the cliche Afghan-led and Afghan-owned is really not such a cliche, but it's a powerful message that suggests Afghanistan should stand up and take charge of its future. Well, ladies and gentlemen and friends, it seems that one part of Afghanistan has taken charge of its future, but it is a military solution imposed on Kabul. We could well say that there's 2/3 or 1/3 or half of Afghanistan that is afraid of the future as it unfolds under a Taliban dispensation that may not respect the rights, not just outside of Kabul, not just in the peripheries, but even in the urban centers where it may manage its writ. Now, for managing writ has always been a problem, as Afghan watchers will know. It's never been a centrally run country, but it has the singular ability to defeat one empire after another. It defeated the British 3 times in wars. Until then, they decided to impose a Popalzai, which is Shah Shuja, on the throne. And then they paid off the Ghilzai tribes, who are the foot soldiers of the Taliban today, to ensure safe passage for trade and other maneuvers through what is a greatly strategic position. So Afghanistan has always been that great strategic buffer. And now it will again be in the crosshairs of many questions, changes, and even perhaps governance deficits, and we hope not security vacuums, but clearly there was a security vacuum. It was spectacular, it was dangerous, and it still is an evolving situation where even Panjshir is offering up some level of resistance, but that is, something really that's one-off for the time. But the peril to stability still exists, which means the peril to Pakistan continues to exist. And principal in that peril is groups such as the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, who have posed a great danger to Pakistan. In the past, they have been the frontline terrorist group that has targeted not just girls' schools, but khankas, mosques, our military installations, hospitals, everything. You all remember those awful days from 2008 to literally 15-16, when Pakistan conducted a series of military and kinetic operations against violent extremism, and actually quietly eventually won that war. We won all those battles. Some of those of hearts and minds, but mostly were kinetic. And for that, our military has been fairly successful. It has been at times, counterterrorism is often like, eating soup with a fork. But all of that, these are not set piece battles, which is why, all national security analysts look at Afghanistan as very difficult terrain, the mountains, the way the locals fight, and of course their interest, their strong attachment to independence, to Afghan identity, and to resisting occupation are one of the reasons we saw the Afghanistan National Security Forces melt away with little resistance. That's one of the reasons. You can look at the SIGA reports, the corruption, and then of course not knowing who they fought for. Back in Pakistan, this was quite, by the way, predicted with some trepidation. Many of us thought that civil war would not be long, if at all. There was skirmishes and bad ones for a few days, but it was not protracted. That does not mean, however, that all of Afghanistan has been pacified by the Taliban. Make no mistake, it has not been pacified, and never fall into that trap of believing your own biases. Okay, so it has not. Afghanistan is very multi-ethnic, and what unites them is their very strong sense of Afghan identity, which that unites them. They will resist colonialism. Many of them see benefits to being allies with a developed economy and culture such as the United States and of course the 42 other NATO countries that were occupying, but they were occupying powers. And there were hardly any rules of engagement on the ground that matters when a night raid hits your house. Well, and there's very little, there's little picking and choosing. Then, of course, the arbitrariness of an average Afghan citizen's universe falls apart. Afghan fragility will also continue to haunt Afghan economic and otherwise, to haunt Afghan consolidation as a government. And that is one of the things that the Taliban are struggling with. They are also struggling. They will have to struggle with core state function. Who pays for core state function? Afghanistan was and continues to be dependent on foreign aid. Huge percentages, over $9 billion of its reserves are in the American Federal Reserve, which, as you all know, are frozen. So while there's a huge cash economy floating around, none of it will be able to be managed by the bank as monetary policy to lower inflation. And you may see runaway inflation, you may see a governance and stability vacuum, which you're already seeing. I mean, Kabul airport is still being managed by a group of foreign nationals, including Turkey and others, and the United States and the UK. So still you see an inability. You'll see that the Americans are writing in their advisories that they cannot guarantee safe travel or access to Kabul airport, which they're trying to control. But even that is proving difficult, as heart-rending pictures have shown us. So it's not going to be as easy as we think. Managing a negotiated settlement has never been easy in Afghanistan, and it will best be done by Afghans. Right now, some part of Afghanistan also failed Afghanistan. Let's be very clear about that. And I don't want to get in the business of pointing fingers, but I think what we do need to look at is, as we watch and see the situation change, what are Pakistan's stakes? Again, their peace. How will there be peace? How will we prevent a critical massing of the TTP groups such as Islamic State in Khorasan, IKIS, and Daesh, which are also known as Daesh? The subnational Baloch groups. You are already seeing blasts in against the Chinese. You've seen Dasu, then yesterday we saw another terrorist attack. So there are already spillover effects. Some people may say this is arguable, but I'm very clear that there are spillover effects into Pakistan already of instability and no notion of a central authority. There wasn't a central authority for a long time, especially when the drawdown began last year. But the point is, when there is less and less of a central authority, then the eastern and southern provinces that border Pakistan become restive with groups that have migrated from Syria, Yemen, Libya, and they find a good home there. There are weapons, there is cash, there is a lot of covert games also going on in that region, and I won't mince word. There have been for a long time, and there have been many spoilers to this game, not least of them being India, because it is supremely unsettled by what has happened in Afghanistan, and its evacuations are continuing. But as you know, there are other countries that have kept embassies open: the Chinese, the Russians, obviously the Pakistanis, and the Iranis, who have also hosted many refugees and are continuing to do so. Regional countries have a high stake in Afghan stability, which brings me to how how the Chinese and the Russians see it. These are very important players, and part of this entire play can go south. Part of what developments that lead on the in Eurasia can go south because of serial American neuralgia, and I think it is misplaced. I want to put on record. I think it is misplaced. American neuralgia about China's growth and this China leading the Asian century, if you like. This ignominious American exit has certainly bookended the American century, as some writers in America are saying. We don't have to get into those analyses. It's already being done by Americans themselves. They are still a critically thinking society. That has been one of their great strengths. But what is going on in China, and how do the Central Asian states and all view this? Everyone has stakes in stability. China is particularly concerned because obviously it has economic stake. It has not got huge, shall we say, infrastructural foundations there that it can't unroll in a hurry if it needs to. It can. The mining interests and the other things north of Kabul, the other investitures are mostly they're not deeply embedded in Afghan soil. So China has interests in stability, economic prosperity, obviously investments, and it is maintaining it will likely maintain a high diplomatic engagement with Afghanistan. It will also obviously continue to do that with Pakistan. Again, as I say, the peril will be to Pakistan, where the large CPEC projects and Chinese investment is looking like it cannot be a target. We will be, of course, scrambling to ensure that it is not, but these are the dangers and risks of such great tectonic geopolitical shifts in the region. In all of this, China is clearly looking not to project power. It's not looking for a combat role, for instance, in Afghanistan. It never has. That's never been its mode or method or favored brand of foreign policy power projection. China prefers to project power economically and as a builder of infrastructure. Not necessarily, America is still financially much bigger, but as a builder of infrastructure, China is now expanding its role across the globe. And of course, access to water and access to Afghanistan. Water particularly offers it the opportunity to link the Eurasian continent, so it finally becomes a two-ocean power if and when it is able to realize the BRI, the spectacular BRI ambitions, which is making the United States a little hostile and I think unable to assess pragmatically the nature and scope of Chinese diplomacy. It's very different from the American model or the Western model. China does not like to lay down a military basis first. It likes to trade and economically empower. The future is, of course, not for anyone to predict, but these are the projections. And of course, Pakistan is in the crosshairs of all of this. Pakistan is in the crosshairs of all of this. And with Russia too, we are beginning to have better relations. Russia too will not want a combat role in Afghanistan. They have had a bad experience. They may be experiencing a little Schadenfreude right now at the American withdrawal. at the told you so moment, but they also will likely remain engaged. Now, for them, the Taliban are still a proscribed group, right? And they're still proscribed. And what they are doing is, yet from 2018, they have remained extremely engaged with all groups in Afghanistan. They have hosted conferences. Moscow is part of the Troika Plus arrangement, which is China, America, Moscow, and of course Pakistan with Afghanistan. And this can pave the way for a future agreement of what benchmarks one must get into in terms of, the first question will be recognition of who recognizes Afghanistan's new government and on what terms. So I think the UK already has had a session of parliament. Of course, Pakistan hasn't. The UK has had its session and it's been setting the tone for others, for other Western partners. It's by saying that we work towards common conditions about the conduct of the new regime before deciding together. The key word is together, whether to recognize and on what terms. Now, why would Afghanistan kill itself wanting recognition? It does because it needs to deal with the multilateral community, especially for financial and other gains. How will they do in terms of this with China and Russia? Well, Russia, as I said, will not want to have a combat role like Turkey or Iran. Iran has different stakes. They also have, there are many now Persianate Taliban in their shura, at least 1/4 of it is, unlike before. And but Russia has had that profile of wanting to keep being the net security provider in the Central Asian region, particularly Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. And it's been conducting very clear military exercises with these three countries in the past few weeks to very clearly show and exhibit muscle and that it is vigilant in its area, or rather sphere of influence. And for China, the worry, of course, is the Xinjiang province, where the Uyghurs can create a great deal of unrest. And worryingly for them and for everyone else, including Pakistan, the Eastern Turkmenistan group, the ATEM group of rebels and terrorists that strikes at the soft underbelly of China through Xinjiang and has in the past been impacting Pakistan too, has been taken off the UN and American lists for terrorism. So it's been delisted. It is free to operate now. So that has its own ramifications, right? And we can think about those and talk about those in the future. What will our relation be like with the United States? I'm going to just close up on that. Well, I mean, I think the United States, there can be worst case scenarios, but we must not get caught in enjoying the fall of Kabul as a fall of American power. I don't think that is where we should take it, because we need to stay diplomatically engaged with the United States. We need to understand they can be managed as frenemies, friends, but enemies is of course the worst situation. India is weaponizing the hashtag sanction Pakistan. This hashtag is the new headline of the 21st century, as you know, so it can be very perilous for Pakistan. And we will have to watch where we go. The rise of violent extremism can be exported to Pakistan if the Taliban 2.0, as they like to call themselves, are not able to consolidate power with ability to control the battlefield commanders who are often, as far as women and minorities are concerned, are often displaying different tactical outcomes than those that the Taliban spokesmen are at great pains to curate. There is a strong curated rebranding network narrative coming out of the Taliban 2.0 that we will respect the rights of women, we will respect minorities, we will be inclusive, and we will not let our territory be used for attacks on other countries. How they manage the gap between this messaging and very painstaking messaging and what plays out on the ground, time will tell. Very often we are seeing situations where that is not the case, but we must give the whole, I think, the whole dramatic turn of events, some time for consolidation and some idea of what terms of engagement most countries will evolve, other than supporting peace and stability in this war-torn country. They've seen war for 40 years. The heart goes out, particularly to women and children. And we hope sincerely that they're able to restore some level of peace and the sharing of power between different ethnic groups in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Sherry Rahman. Two or three quick questions with you because of very limited time with us.
Yeah.
What lessons can the world learn from America's war in Afghanistan, in your view?
Well, first of all, I think the world is right now still assessing what just happened here. The actual term is what just happened, and so are the United States. I mean, we can go into endless deconstructions of what happened, and I think we will. I think we all will, because learning from history is crucial to avoid repeating it. And one of the things that the world, I think, is looking at is in a bit of also recoil right now from Afghanistan or meddling in Afghanistan, is that this country will not accept colonization in any long term. I mean, it has for 20 years, but it kept the resistance continued. It could, and you saw the asymmetry of power over there. Power alone, the big message is that power alone is not ever enough to subjugate or pacify societies, particularly like Afghanistan, which are very proud and tribal, and they may end up fighting with each other, which is again a long history of theirs. But they will fight a foreigner before anything else. They may find collaborators, but they will fight a foreigner, and they have that Afghanistan, the whole Afghan identity very close to the promises they make each other and the societies they govern. So I think that's one of the lessons that America has also learned. I don't know if it's learned, but it should have learned one more lesson, that when you are trying to seek a political solution, which is always the way out. I mean, none of us believe in military outcomes, either for Kashmir or for Afghanistan, for any country in the world. Then you do it when you have, and there are kinetic forces in the field, and the ISAF and the United States have had military forces in great number in Afghanistan for 20 years, over 42 countries, right? So when Pakistan, who knows the country better, said to them, I as ambassador would say to them, it's 2012, now is the time to talk to the Afghanistan. They would say, no, no, no. We are in a position of strength. We don't need to. We are going to soften them by battling them on the battlefield. And we would just say, look, the Afghan ambassador is with us. This is the time to do it. They have the clocks, as you know, etc., etc. You have the clocks, they have the time. And so when they've started negotiating, timing is everything in battlefield and political equation. When Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad started talking in 2020, the Taliban had the advantage, had the clear battlefield advantage, and American and military and NATO war fatigue had completely set in. There was no appetite to be deployed in Afghanistan anymore. And what was the message to the rest of the world? I wrote, and this was February 2020 when the deal happened, 29th February, the Doha agreement. I looked at it and I've written on Twitter many times since then. I've said it in Parliament. That was never a peace deal. We were all euphemistically calling it that. That was America's exit agreement. And that was between the Taliban and the United States of America. So they don't have a Saigon moment. But as it so happens, they had their Saigon moment, as someone says, Saigon on steroids. And so I think there are powerful lessons for the Americans to learn. They have not also engaged with the American war like they engaged with the Vietnam War. That time there was a draft in place. There were 1.7 million Americans in there. The world right now is just processing the speed with which the Afghan National Security Forces fell like dominoes, the provinces, how fast they fell. So they're processing that, but I think the lessons are very clear and the writing is on the wall. But I think what's important for us is to protect Pakistan's both image as well as
Yes.
policy and people. That is the point of foreign policy, to protect your population, your stability, and your sovereign territory. That is should be our first concern.
Thanks, Sherry. And another question is that can Pakistan expect destabilization and security challenges with the new Afghan setup? What should be Pakistan's focus now, and how can Pakistan create more space for themselves in Afghanistan?
See, we definitely need to engage with all groups in Afghan society, and we've had a history of division there, and I think that it will take many more years of sharing our bona fides, that we are not here to provide military support to any one group that is seeking preeminent political and military power in Afghanistan. So I think that's something we have to prove to the Afghans, and some have learned that. They have particularly learned that Pakistan does not have an appetite for ducks and drakes, playing ducks and drakes in the strategic backyard. And what would be, I mean, we have been providing refugee, of course, comfort for years. We have been providing some level of aid, but we must also develop the capability of responding to their asks, okay, to their development asks, as opposed to just military and political asks. And there are a lot of those. So we must develop that capacity and engagement with Afghanistan, engagement across the board, whether it's webinars like this or people wanting to just listen to their complaints. We must not respond in anger. We must not, because history is viewed differently from each individual's side of the bed they wake up on, what they experienced the night before. There was a night raid. If they thought Pakistan was allies, well, they so there's a it's a very complex terrain. We must not respond in anger. We must respond with patience, and we must continue across the board political engagement with all Afghans, and try to ensure that they're able to decide their own, hopefully, democratic future. I have concerns because we're hearing that they say that it won't be a democracy, and well, that's for them. And then there's talk about a 1964 constitution, which is a monarchy. That's for them to really decide in the end. But we have to overcome the bilateral fragility that has become the new normal. We have to change that, and I think we can all work towards that across the board: civil society, thought leaders, governments, and of course militaries.
Thanks, Sherry, for your excellent session with us. And Sherry is actually a very active member of our Corporate Pakistan group as well. And for the inaugural session, I specially engaged two women leaders, Sherry Rahman and Dr. Shiri Bazari. So, Sherry, thanks to you. And next turn is with Dr. Shiri Bazari and another CPG member. Thank you very much, Sherry. So, Shiri is here. Assalamu alaikum, Shiri Mazari. How are you?
Walaikum salam. I'm good, thank you.
So Sherry is Federal Minister for Human Rights, and this is her area of interest and expertise also as far as the national security and foreign policy is concerned. We especially engaged these two women leaders, though these two are very active members of Corporate Pakistan group as well, interacting with our members, and we decided to engage them for the inaugural. And this will be followed by several panel discussions and conversations. So Shiri, over to you for your 15 minutes opening thought, and then this will be followed by question answers with you.
Thank you as well, and I want to thank, of course, the Nutshell Group and the corporate group for giving this opportunity, and to sort of point out that I'm Shireen and not Sherry. Everybody tends to mix that up. Anyhow, Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. I want to basically focus on Pakistan, because, everybody's talking about however there's been this shock with which everything collapsed in Afghanistan. In the US, there is a discussion and debate on the role of the present administration in this sudden collapse. In the UK also, we're seeing that. But what is emerging and what for Pakistan should now be unacceptable is the scapegoating, that the murmurs of scapegoating are coming, whether it's the Western media, whether it's in the US or the UK, in their Congress, in their parliament, the scapegoating of Pakistan for a failure that entirely rests with those who occupied Afghanistan for 20 years should be something that Pakistan is not going to be prepared to accept anymore, because Pakistan itself has been the victim of these wars that were done. First, when the Soviets came into Afghanistan and Pakistan was brought in, and we trained Mujahideen with the help of the CIA, to fight what we were told were foreign invaders. And we were seen as collaborators, therefore. And we suffered the wrath of that. We had armed Taliban groups rising in Pakistan. We had terrorism coming in, militant terrorism coming in, polarization of our society, the drugs and Kalashnikov culture, as many people called it. And of course, we also have been, and then we had, of course, 9/11. And again, we were brought into a war that our Prime Minister has consistently stated for decades was not our war. And he has consistently stated that there would never be a military solution to a peace in Afghanistan. And that's exactly how things have followed. And when he advised the Americans earlier to have a dialogue when they had more strength, when the date of withdrawal had been given, nobody listened. And at the end of the day, the US did dialogue with the Taliban. The US had a Doha agreement with the Taliban. And of course, that was done from a weakened position. And then, of course, they put pressure on us to release the Taliban leadership. Mullah Baradar was released on the US's pressure and insistence as part of the deal that they were doing with the Taliban. And what happened, frankly, at the end of the day, I think nothing, there wouldn't have been any other outcome, even if the US had stayed on for another 6 months. Once you had the agreement, and once you found that you really didn't do any state structure building, you didn't do any nation building. A lot of money was supposedly going into the Afghan National Army, but at the end of the day, where did the money go? What happened? Where was the training of this ANA, which just collapsed? They were not prepared to fight. And Ghani's flight out of Afghanistan, with or without the cash that people say he took, but the fact that he fled and the ANA collapsed because they were not prepared to fight and give up their lives for what they saw as a corrupt government, the Ghani government, then you knew. If you understand these events of why the ANA collapsed and Ghani's flight, you will understand why the Taliban came in and marched in so quickly, which nobody was anticipating. I don't want to go into details, but I do want to draw a similar analogy to what happened in Cuba, where the Americans were supporting a corrupt Batista government. And when Castro and his revolutionaries started marching in, they hardly fought any big battles because the Cuban army collapsed, the Cuban state structure collapsed, and Batista fled out of Havana, and the revolutionaries marched in on the 1st of January 1959. Castro himself was fighting 500 kilometers away, not realizing the collapse would come. So there is this similarity of, when you're putting your money and not even assessing where it's going, how it's being spent, and if it's only bolstering up a corrupt government where there's no infrastructure development at all, where the military may be getting arms and so on, but where is the military sense of camaraderie or the sense of institutional commitment? You don't do any of that, and you think just pouring in money will resolve the issue. I'm afraid that's not what happened, and that is where the answer lies. And if now all the failures on other people's part is going to be put, and Pakistan is going to be scapegoated, this is not going to be acceptable at all. Because and by the way, Pakistan is a country that has been abandoned periodically by the US. the only interest the US has ever had in Pakistan is when it has other regional interests in our area. And then we're abandoned. And then every time Bush said, we will not abandon Pakistan this time. And lo and behold, what happened at the end of the day? We were sanctioned after helping and supporting the Americans. So we have had enough of blame games. We have had enough of scapegoating. And I also want to point out just a factual thing that there was no Pakistani involved in 9/11 attacks at all. And yet we suffered. As I said, we became looked at as collaborators, and nobody should underestimate the power of Pashtun nationalism. And once it's mixed with the jihadi spirit, it becomes indomitable. I mean, nobody should underestimate Pashtun nationalism. And unfortunately, for 20 years, this was never understood by NATO and by the US. And Pakistan not only went into a war which was not its war, it lost 70,000 people. Its economy was destroyed. There was more polarization. More refugees came in. We had the Afghan refugees coming in at the time of the Soviet invasion. We had refugees coming in after 9/11, and very little international support for those refugees. And the worst of it was that at then tribal areas, now they're part of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, but being destabilized, especially because of drone attacks. Hundreds of drone attacks on Pakistan by a country that was supposed to be our ally. After all, the US had not declared war on Pakistan, and yet it was raining bombs through drones on Pakistani soil and territory. So this is something that Pakistan has suffered. As the Prime Minister keeps pointing out, and we believe this strongly, that we have been victims of these wars that are being fought. After Afghanistan, Pakistan is the country that has suffered the most because of these military occupations and military invasions, or whatever, however well you like to see them, whether it was the Soviet Union or whether it was US NATO. So there is, and now what are we seeing? I think the Taliban, let's be fair, the Taliban today in their statements and in their actions so far are very different from the Taliban that were there earlier, ruling Afghanistan. For one, they have categorically stated that they want an inclusive government. Will they live up to it? Give them a chance. We've had the Northern Alliance in Pakistan, their leadership, what was the Northern Alliance? They've been interacting with Pakistan leadership, and we are trying our best to hope and hoping that there will be an inclusive leadership. But the Pakistani position is clear. We will accept whatever the Afghan people decide. We are not there to impose anything on the Afghan people. All the old conceptualizations that Pakistan was accused of, they don't hold anymore. As Sherry Rahman pointed out, this is the third government that has made it clear that we want an inclusive government, that we want what the Afghans want, and that we are not going to impose, neither do we have the power to impose, and that there is no military solution, and there never was a military solution. So look at the money and the lives wasted, the lives lost in trying to achieve something which was not achievable, a military solution for peace in Afghanistan. That just cannot happen. And Pakistan is also, and no bloodshed has been shed as such, with the Afghans coming into Kabul. And what has been very encouraging is a very clear-cut statement by the Taliban that they will not allow their territory to be used against any country, and that there is no place for an armed TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, in Afghanistan, because that has been one of our major problems with the previous Afghan government, where India was given a lot of space to fund TTP, and other terrorists targeting Pakistan from Afghan soil. So, in Pakistan, from a Pakistani perspective, one of the major positives to come out is the fact that the Taliban are going to put an end to it. We will wait to see whether they live up to it, to the TTP militarization, and to other terrorist groups. The Chinese have a problem with the ETIM, East Turkmenistan group, terrorist group. And that will be of great comfort to the Chinese also, because one of the major problems that our countries surrounding Afghanistan face is terrorism coming from Afghan soil. So the fact that the Taliban have said they will not be, they will not allow their territory to be used by these terrorist groups against the neighbors or by any country is a very welcome position for us. And of course, equally important and very comforting, although we have to see how it's operationalized, is their commitment that they will not place restrictions on women and girls and minorities. We saw Shia during Muharram, the majalis and processions taking place, which was welcome after the initial problem in Kabul, where they took down some Shia flags, religious banners, but then there were the Jalus, as it's called, or the processions and the majalis were allowed, and they took place, and there were large numbers there of Shias who went and participated. So that initial move was, this has been a positive development. Girls are going to school. They've been asked to cover their heads, not wear hijab or any full hijab or anything. I don't know. The point is, if it does not impede women working and girls going to school, then there are countries in Europe that don't allow Muslim women to dress as they want. In fact, they cannot go to school, they can't work in public places, and they can even be arrested. So there is that law which some of us have protested about, but that is the law of that country. And maybe not more than one European country. I don't want to get into name calling here, but there are laws restricting or suggesting dress codes for women in so many parts of the world. I personally feel it's not a good thing. But if the Taliban, if they form an all-inclusive government, and if by consensus they decide to have this, and if they do not impede women's participation in public life, they do not impede women schooling, then we'll have to see. And I think this is also a positive sign. And so far, schools have opened again. We're seeing women anchors and women coming, newscasters coming on at least one Afghan television station that one has seen. So these are positive early signs. And for Pakistan, what is critical is that stability is arrived at sooner rather than later, because we need that stability now in this region. It has been destabilized for far too long, and this destabilization has impacted negatively on Pakistan. And as I said, we have been one of the victims in this. So, in that sense, we are waiting and watching. We are hoping there'll be an inclusive government in Afghanistan. And what I do feel I need to point out again is that trying to squeeze the Taliban by withholding their funds, which the World Bank has done, or by freezing their assets in the US, which the American government has declared, and by Canada declaring that they will never recognize, that they will not recognize the Taliban government, without giving the Taliban a chance to actually form the government. And this seems rather bizarre. On the one hand, you have the US signing an agreement with the Taliban. So they were legitimized by the international community through this agreement. All the NATO countries agreed to this. So all those countries, including Canada, which is a member of NATO, recognized and accepted the Taliban, and they signed an agreement with them. So on the one hand, you do that, and then on the other hand, you say, oh no, we can't accept the Taliban and we're going to freeze their funds. You are squeezing them and pushing them in a direction that you really don't want to push them in, and which none of us want to see happen. because we want inclusivity. We want the Taliban to be mainstream, to reach out. But if you're going to corner them and hem them in right from the start, then I think that a lot of problems are going to arise. So we need to be very careful on how we handle. And I think Pakistan has made clear that it will work for a consensus with other neighbors, and there is the trilateral meeting, plus the 3+1 meeting is about to take place. Our foreign minister, as I speak, is traveling to the Central Asian states. So we believe that there should be a consensus, including on recognition. We believe that there should be that the Taliban should be encouraged to live up to their commitments that they have made about inclusivity, about protecting the human rights of minorities, women, girls. We need to encourage them to live up to the statement they've made about not allowing their territory to be used for against any other country. So we should encourage them to move in that direction, to show by their actions what they have said in their statements. And as Sherry also pointed out, one thing is certain: the regional dynamics and the security dynamics have altered tremendously. And for me, I think in a good way from Pakistan's perspective, because it undermines the sort of strange military strategic alliance of the Quad with the US and with India, trying to sort of hegemonize this region under their power politics. I think this leaves more space for the development of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a remarkable initiative of the Chinese, where they're actually helping infrastructure development across the region and beyond, even in Africa. So I think that over the coming years, we will see a shift in the strategic dynamics, where the military-centric approach of the US and India will not be the dominant strategic factor, and the regional states will focus more on geoeconomics, on development, and will not be impeded by occupations and by, as I said, the military strategic unidimensional approach that unfortunately the US and its NATO allies adopted. And again, I just want to conclude by saying that for Pakistan has to be the first priority. We have been victims of what has been happening in this region for far too long, and we are not going to let ourselves be scapegoated, because enough is enough. We will look after our own national interests, and that is how our Afghan policy will be defined. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shiri Mazari. My first question to you is that will Pakistan be among the first to recognize the Taliban government, provided the transition of power is negotiated and without significant violence?
I think Pakistan will recognize, along with its allies, especially its regional allies. I don't think there will be a unilateral recognition, and Pakistan would be alone and the first. That I don't think is going to happen.
Okay. So will the CPEC and One Belt, One Road project be expanded to include additional major infrastructure in Afghanistan? And will the Chinese increase the scope of their collaboration with the Taliban government? What is your view?
I think if the Taliban deliver on their commitments, especially vis-a-vis terrorism, there's no reason why the Russians and the Chinese will not increase their economic involvement. And of course, for CPEC, that would be tremendous, because then you have this whole linkage going into Central Asia, going out of Pakistan into Iran and beyond. So in that sense, the potential of development for all the countries in the Belt and Road Initiative will be tremendous. And I think the Chinese have so far shown that they will look at what the Taliban are doing and be ready to invest in Afghanistan.
Thank you. I want to know your, please summarize the session, and I want your closing remarks and your few recommendations for the government of Pakistan. The foreign minister is on the visit of Central Asian countries right now. You are also in interaction with the government and the prime minister. But what are your closing remarks? What are you, for the future of Pakistan?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think that depending on how the political government is formed in Afghanistan, if, as we hope and expect, there'll be an inclusive government, and as we hope that in that case they will not be squeezed in terms of their assets, Afghanistan assets abroad, and we hope that recognition then will come from the international community. If these things happen as we hope and we expect, because we are seeing the Taliban already talking to have an inclusive government, if there is an inclusive government, that would be the first step towards showing their intent to the rest of the world. So that will be very critical. Equally critical will be how they protect the human rights of women, children, and of course the minorities. And the chaos at Kabul airport, unfortunately, because the US controls the inner perimeter of the airport, was largely due to the fact that everything collapsed with Ghani's departure. And it's very unfortunate how that US plane took off with people dying to their deaths from the air. It was inexplicable how a plane would take off in that situation. But hopefully the US will investigate what happened. But I see that if we look at it positively and we sort of encourage what the Taliban have said so far, and we encourage the Taliban and the other parties to dialogue and form an inclusive government, I think things will improve in Afghanistan. People say, that, oh, this is not liberation. But if getting rid of the Soviets was liberation, twice the Afghans got rid of the British from their territory and said they were liberated. So if they've removed another occupation power, if it's not liberation, what is it? Is my question. So I'm hoping that there will be stability, and I'm hoping that the world will give the Taliban a chance if the Taliban continue to live up to what they've said they intend to do.
One academic question with you, because you are expert on foreign policy and the diplomacy and the national security. How would you analyze the diplomatic strategy of the Taliban and how they have maneuvered in the last 5 years? Because actually this is a classic case study, how they maneuvered. Please answer.
I think that the Taliban had a few advantages. They had time on their side. They are Afghans. They lived there. They were among the people. They had time on their side. And they waited and they watched, I think, the corruption that was going on, and the Afghans were getting disgruntled. And I think at the same time, the fact that they survived the military power of the US and NATO eventually brought them to the dialogue table. And I think that their political relevancy never died out. Had they, in my own view is, and our government's view is, that had the US and NATO and had Ashraf Ghani not been so obstinate and had they dialogued with the Taliban much earlier, before withdrawal dates were given and so on, I think that there would have been a much easier solution. But at the end of the day, the outcome would have been this, because you can't win peace just through military occupation. You have to have people supporting you locally, and clearly the Taliban had that support, because like all groups, they lived amongst the people. I mean, people who fight unconventional wars, they don't have military rears. They live amongst the people, and that's what the Taliban were doing. So, like it or not, they had the support of the people, which is why the army collapsed and Ashraf Ghani fled. So I think that they you could say they played a good political game, but I think it wasn't a game. I think they did what they did best, and that was cultivate the people around them and bide their time, which they did very cleverly, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Shiri Mazari. And ladies and gentlemen, this was our inaugural session for the Ahwan Conference. Senator Sherry Rahman participated and Dr. Shiri Mazari participated. And now we will start our second session with conversation with Salim Safi, moderated by Ms. Faria Idris. And this will be followed by another very important dialogue on Pakistan's options in evolving geopolitical situation with Air Chief Marshal Sohail Aman Saab, Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi Saab, Ms. Andaleep Abbas, Senator Anwarul Haq Kakar, Ambassador Riyaz Khokar, and Musharraf Zaidi is the moderator. So Faria is here, and I'm requesting Salim Safi to please join us on the stage, and we will start the 20-minute conversation. And if there is any delay, we will start the next session first, and we will host Salim Safi and Faria Idris' conversation after this session. So let's start the second session. Our other panelists are here for the second session. Moderator is Mr. Musharraf Zaidi. He is also CPG member. And our first panelist is Pakistan's former Chief of Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sohail Aman Saab. Our second panelist is Naeem Khalid Lodi Saab. He's defense analyst and also served as the caretaker defense minister for Pakistan in 2018. Our third panelist is Andaleep Abbas. She's the Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Government of Pakistan. Fourth panelist is Senator Anwarul Haq Kakar. He's member, Senate of Pakistan, and Ambassador Riyaz Khokar. He is Pakistan's former Foreign Secretary. He has also served as Ambassador in the United States of America, China, India, and Bangladesh. Very rich panel, very powerful panel. And our moderator is CPGN Musharraf Zaidi. So all of them are members of Corporate Pakistan Group as well. And the topic is Pakistan's option in evolving geopolitical situation. So Musharraf is in waiting, I think, and also Air Marshal Sohail Aman Saab. So this conference is live on Facebook page and YouTube channel of Nutshell Group, and from all over the world, from different countries, individuals are attending this conference, including the Pakistani diaspora and also the different nationalities who are interested in this issue of Afghanistan. So, आप इसको स्टार्ट करवा दें, इसी सेशन को स्टार्ट करवा दें. मुशर्रफ ज़ैदी को इन कर दें, and also सोहेल अमान साहब. Some technical glitches, but also this is a blessing also, technology, because within 6 days short notice we are hosting this conference while sitting in our homes, and we are connecting with the world, and there is a need to portray Pakistan's narrative all over the world, what Pakistan's foreign ministry is doing. Currently Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi is on his visit to Central Asian countries. This is testing time for the region, and inshallah, together with as united nation with committed nation, we will handle and manage these challenges very well. So let me request Ms. Andaleep Abbas, Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, to please start from her opening remarks. The format is that Musharraf Zaidi is the moderator. He's joining us in a few minutes. So every one of you will start with 3 to 4 minutes opening remarks, followed by question answers with Musharraf Zaidi. Over to you, Andaleep.
Thank you so much, Asfar. And it's great that so many august and experts and leaders and excellencies are here to talk about the most important topic, I think, in the world today, and that is Afghanistan. This is a truly historical moment for the world, and I think for the region in particular. And as they say that when things happen like this, they present opportunities and threats both, depending on how you receive them and how you act upon them. So Afghanistan, as you know, has been a melting hotspot in the geopolitical world. And as Shirin Mazari and Sherry Rahman have very expansively talked about the situation, I'm not going to go over it. I'm just going to give an overview of how in foreign affairs, in the foreign ministry, and as government of Pakistan, we are approaching this particular situation. We have a four-pronged approach towards the region and Afghanistan in particular. Our first approach is that we are partners in peace. This is a stated policy for us, and we have been stating it for a long period of time. Our Prime Minister has categorically said that this is what our whole focus is in Afghanistan and in the region in particular. So that is why when you saw the Absolutely Not interview, that was in line with this policy, that we are not going to be partners in conflict. We were, and we suffered the most. And we are not going to repeat the mistakes we made previously. So we are partners in peace, and we are going to do our utmost to promote peace in the region, especially in Afghanistan. Because if Afghanistan is peaceful, Pakistan is peaceful. Pakistan has paid a heavy price of the conflict that has taken place in Afghanistan. So that's the first approach. The second one is that we are going to support an inclusive, sustainable government in Afghanistan. And we are very clear on it, because we have seen that whenever it is not inclusive, it is not sustainable. It comes, people change after 3 years, and it goes back to being in conflict, and in a huge conflict, even greater conflict than before. So we are supporting stakeholder dialogue everywhere. As you saw, there was a particular delegation which came on a few days before the takeover in Kabul, and it represented multiple stakeholders over there with whom we are talking. Our ambassador over there is talking to the ex-presidents of Afghanistan, all in an effort to bring everybody to the table and do a dialogue, which has been the Prime Minister Imran Khan's policy. Even 20 years ago, he was the lone voice who said that dialogue is the only solution. Military solutions are never sustainable. Number three, we are very conscious about the humanitarian issues that Afghanistan is facing. And our embassy and our government is doing everything in this period, which is uncertain, where people are evacuating, where other embassies are closed now. Our embassies are working day and night to make it possible for people who want to leave the country and to be safe and sound as far as this period of transition is concerned. And last but not the least, our government has shifted from geopolitics to geoeconomics. Very clearly, as a policy, as a foreign policy, as a trade policy, we have said that we want to bring the region together, not through just political means, but more through economic means, because this is a golden trade corridor. And let me say that in the 80s, it was the Southeast Asian nations which were supposed to be the Asian tigers. And Pakistan has a vision that now in the 2001 and 2021, 24, 25, it is going to be the South Central Asian nations which are going to go up. So peace in Afghanistan will mean a corridor where train, railway networks will create a market bigger than the European Union. So that is the four-pronged approach that we are following. And we are happy to see that the bloodshed that was expected has not happened, but we are very sensitive and we are keeping a watch on everything, giving the perspective that things are still unfolding as we talk.
And over to you, Musharraf. Musharraf is here now, and all the panelists are here. I am grateful to all of you on behalf of Corporate Pakistan Group. And Musharraf, over to you. Andeep already covered her opening remarks. Please.
I'm grateful. First of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and salam to everyone watching, and a special salam to the fantastic panel. I think it's a real credit to Asfar and his ingenuity and his leadership that he's been able to mobilize such a fantastic group so quickly. On such if
am I audible? I'm General Naim Lodi.
Yes, you are audible, sir. You are audible.
Because there's a lot of distortion.
There is a issue with Musharraf. So let's ask Ansaf for his remarks.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Okay, perfect. I think as for very good job done. Like everybody said, and I'm sure that the policy guidelines would eventually be made out of this huge effort and put up to the government so that they can take the rich space from here. I just want to make 2 or 3 points. And this is not about what happened. We all know what has happened. But what's really interesting to see that there are 2 different kind of strategies in the world which have happened. One is the West and United States, and one is the East, the China. A slow, progressive. I remember going out to Africa about 2 decades ago, and the Chinese would go do mining, but still make small schools in the hospitals. And then they took on the BRI. And look at this approach, vis-a-vis being the unipolar world, America decided to handle everything by force. And then it's not sustainable. We saw it. Because the people-to-people contact was not there. The investment in the people's well-being was not there. And then you make a military which is not motivated and which does not have that loyalty. Everything crumbled because of these reasons. Now, it's very important for the United States to look back and see right from the World War II to so many, I don't have to quote numerous, but if we spend trillions of dollars and I think not less than 7 to 8 million people killed, this is not fair. Where is it going to go from here? If the United States realizes and alters the course, if it does, that's something very positive. But if it is a situation where this is taken as a defeat, which is taken as a situation where there's supposed to be a reaction to it, and of course, please realize that this space is going to be fed up by the regional activity. Whether it is the crossroad of the trade or influence. So America will feel left out, and it will be very important for us in Pakistan to watch out for the stability both in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And of course, India has its own turns to the whole thing. So I think we are into a very important place where the 2 kinds of approaches to the world have become visible. Media management or the perception management will come in. Why should they be talking of girls going to the school or not going to the school? I think Taliban have played their innings pretty good. I think we need to give that credit to them to start with. Just been less than a week. And they made it very clear in an amnesty. Girls participating into the school activity, the women role into the parliament. What else do we expect them to exactly do? So I think we'll have to watch out very carefully. One more small point. That myth of democracy. Democratic system may be the best system, but they're not the only systems in the world. Chinese have a system that's worked fine. Africans have their own system that work fine. So I think it's a golden opportunity for Taliban to show an Islamic ideological system if it can work effectively. So I think I would call this an hour of cautious hope, while we in Pakistan must support and not intervene and not interfere, and to let Taliban settle down to what they are. They've done a big job. making sure in the last 6 months that they were coordinating with so many agencies, and of course, a peaceful go through did take place. And we saw that happen, both military and the Northern Alliance, Tajiks, and rest of the people. My last point here is that Afghans and the region stands at the most critical time in the history. There's a big opportunity here. China and Russia are there to make sure that Afghans, they may not have an industry, but they can become an excellent trade corridor. And not only the Central Asian republics out to the Gwadar. Look at where Gwadar opens to the Gulf of Hormuz, out to the west, and of course the Strait of Malacca to the onto the east side. So I think it's a big opportunity for Afghans and the region to realize a regional approach which can really work wonders to the whole thing. We in Pakistan must watch out for our own security. Indians are taken care of in case of some mischief on their side, which they've usually done. And we must support Afghans to stabilize into a broad-based and all-inclusive government. It will be only then that their governance will come into play, and they'll have to improve their economy to bring prosperity to their people, and inshallah that will happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohail Saab. Musharraf, Salim Safi is also here, so if you will engage him also in this panel discussion and continue from here now, please.
Zabardast, thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulty. We've had the chance to hear from Madam Andalib Abbas, who laid out the government's approach on this. I think a lot of credit has been given to the government, and more should be given for especially the last 6 months or so. There's been some incredible work that has gone into the Doha peace process from the Pakistani perspective. It was also interesting to hear former Air Chief Marshal Suhail Aman's views, some of which surprised me, and I'll come back to what surprised me, and perhaps we can talk more about that. I also had some specific questions for, of course, former Foreign Secretary and Ambassador Riaz Khokar, who's part of this group, Lieutenant General retired Naeem Khalid Lodi, former caretaker defense minister. He's part of this group, and so I'll come to him with some questions. Then, of course, my dear brother and friend, Senator Anwar Kakar, I'm going to come to him last because I think that the voice from Balochistan should have the longest. I didn't know Salim was part of the panel, but let's go to Salim. And Salim Bhai, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how you see the perspective, a lot of perspectives, especially of many senior officials, former senior officials, like Air Chief Marshal Saab, are cautiously optimistic. Some other folks in Pakistan and abroad are less optimistic. आप बताएं आपकी क्या कैफियत है? आप ऑप्टिमिस्टिक हैं या आपको लगता है कि 4 साल जो हुकूमत का मौका मिला था तालिबान को, उसमें हमें काफी जो झलक है या जो प्रूफ है कि तालिबान क्या है क्या नहीं है वो मिल गया था? सलीम साफी साहब।
मुशर्रफ, थैंक यू वेरी मच। और पहले तो मैं माजरत करूंगा क्योंकि मैं उर्दू में ही बोलने वाला हूं और टाट वाला हूं और टाट स्कूल वाला हूं। जो मेरी तालिब इल्माना राय है, एक तो इस दौरान मेरी गुफ्तगू हुई जो अभी अफ़गानिस्तान से जो शमाल की क़यादत आई थी, तो यूनुस कानूनी और करीम खलीली, अहमद ज़िया मसूद, उन सब से बातचीत हुई। अफ़गानिस्तान में जो सोर्सेज हैं, यार दोस्त हैं, उनसे भी बातचीत होती रहती है। और अभी मैं जो चाइना के स्पेशल एनवॉय है अफ़गानिस्तान के लिए, उनसे मिल के आ रहा हूँ। तो जो मजमूई खाका मेरे जहन में बनता है, तो दोनों इम्कानात हैं, हालात के मज़ीद ख़राब होने का या पाकिस्तान की आजमाइशों के मज़ीद बढ़ने का। और इम्कानात अफ़गानिस्तान में पीस के भी हैं और हो सकता है पाकिस्तान की मुश्किलात की कमी के भी हैं, लेकिन मजमूई तौर पर मेरे जहन में परेशानी और ख़दशात का जो पलड़ा है वो भारी है। और पाकिस्तान के अंदर भी हमें दो तरह के
वो ठीक है, लेकिन वो बार बार कट रहा है, तो फिर मैं दोबारा ट्राई कर रहा हूँ, फिर मैं आ रहा हूँ, तो दरमियान में फिर मसला
सॉरी सलीम, ये अपना जनरल साहब, ہاں اگر باقی سب کو ہم میوٹ کر دیں, سلیم اپنی بات پوری کر لیں, اینڈ دین obviously I'll come to everyone inshallah. Please سلیم بھائی کنٹینیو. اور آپ نے اپنا اردو استعمال پہ آپ نے معذرت نہیں کرنی تھی, یہ بہت برا لگتا ہے. آپ پلیز بات
نہیں, وہ اس لیے بہرحال ہمیں تو پراؤڈ ہونا چاہیے, اور میری تو اردو بھی کچھ پشتو نما اردو ہوتی ہے, لیکن بھی کے پاکستانی ہم اردو بولتے ہوئے پراؤڈ فیل کرتے ہیں. لیکن میں چونکہ باقی سارے لوگ انگریزی میں تھا مجموعی طور پروگرام, تو اس حوالے سے میں نے معذرت کی. میں یہ کہہ رہا تھا کہ پاکستان میں ہمیں دو ٹرینڈز نظر آتے ہیں.
سلیم بھائی ہم صرف میں اس لیے بات کر رہے تھے کہ the conference was kind of international conference, lot of people بنا اردو سے اتنی محبت اتنی آپ کو.
جی جی I can understand جی. تو
and I'll continue to just to clarify, Air Chief Marshal Saab, that wasn't a slight on you or anybody else. I'll continue to speak in English.
I fully understand that. Yeah.
Bismillah, Salim bhai, please continue.
جی, تو میں یہ عرض کر رہا تھا کہ پاکستان میں ہمیں دو ٹرینڈز نظر آتے ہیں, ایک جوبیلیشن کی اور جشن کی, اور کچھ جو ہمارے قوم پرست حلقے ہیں تو ان کے ہاں پختون نیشنلسٹ, ان کے ہاں کچھ ماتم کی سی کیفیت نظر آتی ہے. میرے نزدیک یہ دونوں بلا جواز ہیں, اور نہ تو ہمیں جشن منانا چاہیے اور نہ ہمیں جو ہے ماتم کرنا چاہیے. اب پہلی بات یہ کہ ہم اگر کہتے ہیں کہ بھئی افغان لیڈ افغان اون, تو پھر اگر ہم خوشی کسی ایک فریق کی فتح پہ مناتے ہیں تو بھی وہ ہمیں فریق بناتا ہے, اور اگر ہم ماتم کرتے ہیں تو وہ بھی ہمیں فریق بناتا ہے. اور پھر خصوصاً گورنمنٹ سائڈ سے کچھ بیانات ایسی آ رہی ہیں کہ جو اررسپانسبل ہیں. مثلاً ایک تو ابھی اس وقت بہتری یہ آئی ہے کہ چونکہ اشرف غنی افغانستان کے اندر اتنے زیادہ نفرت کا نشانہ بنے کہ ہماری پوزیشن جو ہے شکر الحمدللہ پیچھے چلی گئی, اور پھر خود امریکہ کے خلاف اتنے جذبات اس وقت زوروں پہ ہیں کہ اس کی وجہ سے بھی ہمارے پوزیشن جو ہے وہ ہم پیچھے چلے گئے. تو مجھے ایک تو یہ لگتا ہے کہ معاملات اتنے زیادہ خوش اسلوبی کے ساتھ آگے نہیں بڑھیں گے, اور مجھے انکلوسیو گورنمنٹ کا امکان بہت کم نظر آتا ہے, کیونکہ طالبان نے جب امارت اسلامی اناؤنس کر دی تو اس کے بعد اس میں دیگر فریقوں کی شمولیت کا امکان کم ہوگا. جب وہ نہیں ہوگا تو امریکہ اور ویسٹ ان کو تسلیم نہیں کریں گے. تو ایک ابھی جو ہیوملیشن اٹھانی پڑی ہے امریکن پریزیڈنٹ کو, برٹش پرائم منسٹر کو, یورپین ہیڈ آف گورنمنٹس کو, تو میرے خیال میں جب تھوڑی سی یہ فضا ٹھنڈی ہوگی تو پھر اس کا امکان یہی ہے کہ وہ ملبہ پاکستان پہ گرائیں گے. ایک طرف افغانستان
سلیم بھائی ادھر ذرا رکتے ہیں, کیونکہ میں چاہ رہا ہوں کہ باقی جو فریقین ہیں ان کو بھی ہم ذرا گفتگو میں لائیں. میں واپس آپ کے پاس آؤں گا. Ambassador Riaz Khokar, few people in Pakistani history have the kind of experience of diplomacy that you have. Aapne abhi, you heard, Salim express a degree of maybe less optimism than many others. I would be openly pessimistic, but it's not my panel, it's yours. So I wanted to ask you, Khokar Saab, just talk us through the particularities and the complexities of recognizing a new government. If the Islamic Emirate is indeed the title and the way forward in Afghanistan, what are the dynamics? How will that work at the UN? Should Pakistan be among the first to recognize it? Should Pakistan wait for others? Should it approach a bloc approach, a regional approach, a global approach? What are the conditions that should be set for accordance of recognition? Just talk to us a little bit about the technicalities of these issues, please, Ambassador Riaz Khokar. Sir, you'll have to unmute before you speak. Abhi unmute nahi hue aap. There you are. Oh, no, you unmuted for a moment and then muted again. Yeah, now you're good.
Okay.
Now you're good.
Thank you, Aswar, for inviting me, and Musharraf, thank you for giving me the floor. The Taliban leaders have just got to Afghanistan, and I think it's patently unfair that the entire world is virtually harassing them. They need time to settle down to form a government. We have known these people, and I think Pakistan has made great contribution in bringing about the Doha talks. And I think here I would like to give credit to this group of Taliban leaders who have shown great diplomatic skill, great political skill, great military skill, and of course a spirit of accommodation. I want to emphasize that they are somewhat different from the previous Taliban leadership. I think this is an important aspect. And so far that they have spoken to the international community, on television networks, etc., they have shown reasonableness, and I think the real test will come when they can match their words with their deeds. So I think it's a bit unfair to put them on the mat from the beginning. On the question of recognition, I think this is a very delicate matter, but clearly Pakistan has got into this sort of framework where we are talking about the broad-based and inclusive government and human rights and rights of women. So these are all good things. But you know, the Taliban will feel under tremendous pressure. Now, the technical aspects of recognition are, is the Taliban government in control of its territory? Is the government functioning? Is there governance there? Is there the commitments that they have made to the international community about the presence of non-state actors and transnational actors? Will they be able to throw them out or get rid of them?